Hey everyone, my name is Peter Laws, and last night I watched Midsommar for the first time. Skål! Okay, so I'm a bit late to the party, or should I say to the festival, but I did finally see Ari Aster's Midsommar last night, a film about a group of friends who travel to Sweden to take part in a mysterious Swedish festival. Only it's not your average fest. It's not just like beer with dead wasps in it. No, it's something quite different. Now, I've been looking forward to seeing this film for a long time, and suddenly spotted that it's on Amazon Prime. Yes, if you're a Prime customer in the UK, I guess, maybe abroad too, you can now stream Midsommar absolutely free. But should you? Well, stay tuned, because here's my take on Midsommar, which will contain some very mild spoilers. Mild, though. Now, if you follow this channel, you'll know that I really enjoyed Ari Aster's first breakthrough film, Hereditary, when it came out in 2018. I felt there was something about the language of Hereditary, the style of that movie, but particularly the sheer sense of kind of unrelenting, ominous dread that I loved. I just really got into that sort of vibe. So when I heard that he was bringing out this film called Midsommar, I was very excited, not least because I heard that it delved into an area of horror which I find difficult to dislike because it's folk horror. Now, very, very briefly, if you're not sure what folk horror is, it's simply horror that seems linked to the earth, to pagan traditions, to rituals, to, normally centered around nature and forest and animals and stone circles and etc. You'll find its cinematic origins often quoted as being like The Wicker Man, which find a general blood on Satan's claw, although rural horror has always sort of been out there, part of horror. And I'm quite happy to slot Midsommar into the folk horror category, although I suppose you could come along and watch this and feel, well, Hereditary was definitely a horror film. You could even view Midsommar as a kind of twisted drama, but still. Well, within a few minutes, Midsommar does feel like an Ari Aster film, and by that I mean, well, it felt like Hereditary, as in his other film. The slow zooms, the symmetry of the houses and neighborhoods set against the night sky, it's all really quite beautiful, and yet it's pumped with this sense of foreboding. Bad things will happen, or bad things are happening. The film starts with a young college student called Danny Aster. Aster, that means love, doesn't it? French. Have to think about that. Danny Aster faces this family tragedy in what is a pretty gut-wrenching sequence at the beginning of the film, which doesn't show a lot and yet makes you feel a great deal of shock. Until the camera goes out of the window and looks at the black sky where snow is kind of wisping around, and you can see the titles come up. The act is so small you can barely read the writing, and then it says Midsommar, like there is this another world over the hill, somewhere away from all this hideous, banal, in some ways, death and loneliness and dysfunction, which is just all about just normal life. There's nothing transcendent about it. But then over the hill is Midsommar, and that's where the story lies. And this offer of another world soon comes to Danny when she hears that her boyfriend and his friends from the anthropology course at college are going to travel to Sweden to attend this strange midsummer celebration in Helsingborg. And it's very awkward. Does she go along or does she not? But basically she does. I mean, that's the film. And what follows is scene upon scene upon scene of naive American and British tourists, visitors, students, if you will, experiencing life in a strange Swedish commune. And like any other culture, of course, there are differences. And thankfully, in our modern, more sensitive society, we're supposed to respect those differences and observe politely, even when those differences kind of go beyond what we would accept. And even when they appear a peg or two short of insane, the polite kind of Americans and the English guys are just sitting there watching. But of course, the trip then descends into a bizarre, baffling nightmare. Or does it? Does Danny really descend into horror, or does the opposite happen? In Midsommar, does she rise out of the horror of America, or her life, or in England or whatever, and it is something better? That's what I liked about Midsommar. You can easily read this film as simply like a kind of Swedish 2000 Maniacs, if you've seen that. Gullible Americans walk into a culture they don't respect enough, and they are punished, and they pay the price. But there's something else going on here. And something that's centered on this character of Danny Love, as it were. She starts the film in an absolute state of trauma, with no support. It's no surprise that what she's been through. We see her unable to deal with the shock and grief of what happens at the first part of the film. Even that the mere mention of it sends her running to the bathroom in despair. I love the flip scene, by the way, when she goes to the bathroom in one place and is in another. But the film is in pure chaos at the beginning, with nobody around her who understands this is the important part. There's no one who she can reach out to properly. But as the film progresses, we see Danny paradoxically face extreme shock and horror in this new Midsommar place. But with each downward step, it's almost like an upward step into something else, something positive, something transcendent that she hasn't experienced before. This is what is quite fascinating about the film. Let me explain. There are many ways, I think, you could read Midsommar, I guess. And I haven't read any reviews, so maybe this is the normal way that everyone thinks of it like this way. But this is how I read it. I feel Midsommar is a story about empathy, and about the lack of empathy between human beings and between communities. How lonely it can be when you have nobody around you who you can truly connect with, who can truly understand or feel your pain. We see this throughout the film. Danny has this experience, this horrendous tragedy, and she clearly struggles to handle it, understandably. Yet the men she's around at the start, and I don't think it's a mistake that it's men, by the way, that's around her. This one woman surrounded by her friends who are men. They are terrible with empathy, except maybe the guy from Midsommar. In fact, the first time we see them, they're telling Danny's boyfriend Christian that ditch her. She's dead weight. Get rid of that girl. She's she's dysfunctional. She's high maintenance. They want rid of her, so they can get on with their thesis. Later we see time and again how the men, especially Christian, her boyfriend, just doesn't appreciate or connect with Danny or with her pain. Slowly Danny starts to realize that her American friends, her boyfriend in particular, really is just interested in themselves, into, doing their thesis and research and having new experiences. When she tells Christian some worrying news about another one of their party being missing, Christian just makes all the right noises of concern. It sounds like he cares, but it's clearly obvious that he doesn't. In fact, all of those blokes at the beginning, they're all about just themselves. They're not about community, even though they're supposed to be friends. The clearest example is when Christian forgets her birthday. But the guy from the commune, he doesn't forget it. In fact, the only people who seem to connect with Danny truly are those people in the commune. They do this because their entire religious worldview seems predicated or centered on the idea of emotional connection with others, and I mean real connection, with empathy. Two scenes cut against each other in the film show this in massive clarity. There's a sex scene, you won't forget that in a hurry, and a pretty stunning moment when Danny breaks into this kind of body-wrenching sob. And the women of this community gather around her and sob with her. But they're not just crying along with her, I'm alongside you, I weep with you. But they're sobbing in unison with her. It's pretty astonishing. She yelps and moans and screams, and so do they, in exactly the same breath, at exactly the same moment. In fact, this idea of breath, of breathing in and out quickly, is a sign of their community. Putting something out there and putting something back and sharing the breath together. I don't think it's a mistake that that's the symbol of this place. So they share. And that's exactly what Danny needs. After the hideous loneliness of her life in the early part of the film and the increasing realization that her friends and even her boyfriend they just simply cannot provide any meaningful community or empathy or support, she finds a group of people who may well be terrifying, because they are in many ways, and yet they understand human connection. They understand the need to share pain with other people, and that's what she's lacked. At one point, Pele, I think he's called, not the footballer, the Swedish friend who invited them all in the first place, is talking to Danny about her relationship with Christian. And he says, do you feel held? He says, does he feel like home? That's great writing. It's a pretty beautiful piece of writing, that, which for me sums up the message of Midsommar, or at least the one was for me, that human beings, like, we don't just need a friend or a loved one, but actually we need communities, like families around us who hold us when we're down, a group who makes us feel like we've come home. Christians feel that in church, perhaps. In our modern world of loneliness and isolation, it's a particularly poignant message. In other words, Danny comes from this fragmented, isolated culture of ours, and steps into one that is super freaky by our standards, perhaps because they share so much of their experiences, and that's what makes it freaky. It's almost like that's strange that people would share experiences together. Like the sex scene, for example. I mean, people watching the sex scene, their eyes are just going to roll. Some people will think, oh, here we go. It's just the director trying to be weird or trying to be controversial. But it's really not. The symbolism of that sex scene is just so clear. The radical cohesiveness of a kind of community is scary and disturbing to us. Perhaps why? Because we're so used to being individuals, separate entities from one another. I'm not suggesting this is the way we should have sex, by the way. I'm just saying it's a really good symbol. So Danny thinks about it, and that scary radical cohesiveness is terrifying, but actually might be exactly what she needs at this point. It's these sorts of reasons why I feel that Midsommar works, or at least it worked for me. It's got something to say, particularly I think about women and how female empathy has a great deal of power. Does it work as a film in general? Well, yes and no. Let me explain. I really enjoyed the film, but I can see why some viewers may have found it overlong, especially in the director's cut, which I watched. That runs at 172 minutes. That's a long time, and it really felt at times that it could do with a bit of trimming here and there. And so then I found out the theatrical version's 148 minutes. I don't know which scenes were cut, but my instinct is to say that probably is a better movie experience and quite lean. But I'm a completist, you see, and so don't want FOMO. So I'm glad I watched the longer version so I could see everything. I didn't find the film to be quite as arresting and engaging as Hereditary, which I found to be a kind of a relentless nightmare of a film in a good way, even though Hereditary wasn't perfect either. But I would suggest that Midsommar is much more kind of philosophically satisfying. Like the themes in Midsommar are particularly interesting, like the ones I've already spoken about. So, what else about the cinematography is amazing. In places, the cinematography is amazing, and the set design and the general kind of creative vision of the film is just fantastic. I mean, I can see why some viewers might say Ari Aster is just trying to do something to be weird, and yeah, I know people will say that and people don't get it, but I found his heady mix of shocking and beautiful and the downright strange to end up brewing up a kind of like a fascinating cocktail that I'm not finding it easy to forget, and other viewers seem to feel the same way. Well, some. One of the key mechanisms of unease, by the way, in the film is the use of hallucinogenic drugs that the communes seem very chilled out and happy to use. This leads to some moments in the film which feel particularly threatening and tense. In fact, some of the tripping warping that they put on the camera, the kind of effect, freaked me out a bit, because speaking honestly, I might have mentioned this before, but they reminded me of times in my younger days when I might have tried a few drugs here and there, and including one night when I had a bad trip on something, and that was pretty darn scary, and watching just some of the vibe of this evoke that feeling of being trapped inside your own brain for like 12 hours or however long it takes. So one other aspect to point out in Midsommar is the music. I thought the music is great. It's so kind of lyrical. I've been listening to the score of Midsommar for months, actually, because I was listening to it while I was writing my fourth novel, Possessed. And I grabbed it a while back before seeing the film. It's a fantastic score that really sums up the mystery fear, but I do think most of all, the beauty that's threaded through the fear. Of the surroundings, perhaps, maybe the fear of the possibility of being connected with other people. You know, as insane as that seems in this, this connection is both scary and beautiful. Anyway, it's streaming on Spotify if you want to listen to it. At one point, my wife said that the film Midsommar, she said, I watched it with her, she said, this looks like deliberately fake, like it's a set, like it's a play. And I thought, well, yes, but I'm certain that's deliberate. For example, there's many shots in the film where the camera stays really far back from the actors, and they don't cut in many times to close-ups of faces, and they do that, but mostly in those scenes they don't. And it feels like you're sitting in a fixed seat watching the story unveiled on a stage, until suddenly we're right up close and with weeping close-ups or shuddering confusion in actors' eyes. For me, that was cool. Ari Aster, I think, has got to be commended for a film like this in a world of so many generic films, especially because how quick he made it. The film was greenlit in May 18th, 2018 and premiered on June the 18th, 2019. That's a really short amount of time to put a film together that would show in kind of lots of cinemas, and yet he does it. Now, I would encourage you also, and this is spooky, to keep an eye on the backgrounds of the film, because every now and then there are weird things that you can see. For example, there apparently are some hidden faces in the film, like a particularly spooky moment. I'm going to have to rewatch that section to see this, but I've read about this. When Danny is lifted high up by the members of the community in a scene, not spoiling anything there, it's just a bit in the scene, and in the forest trees you can see a huge image of her sister's face. And what's more, it's the precise face from the start of the film when we first meet her sister, who's sitting near her laptop. And you'll know what I mean when you see it. But that sort of thing is creepy. That sort of weaving stuff together. And I assume that this has been written about all over the place. But maybe it's too obvious. But like the character Christian, to me, was some sort of tribute to Edward Woodward's character in The Wicker Man, you know. He's called Christian for a start, this idea of a Christian from America coming into a pagan world, being drawn in by the sexuality of it and being linked by that in one way and finding that hard to resist, and then, how the story ends up. So it seems like a pretty clear reference to Sergeant Howie, isn't it his name? But I might be wrong. Or check out the tapestry that we see at the start of the film. Again, another cool little reference. It's just a strange set of bizarre pictures, except when you actually look at that tapestry in detail, you realize it's a description of everything that's going to happen in the film, to the actual characters. You see the characters in the tapestry. And in fact, you even spot a flower crown right at the start of the film near Danny's parents. It's like suggesting that there is something. This sort of thing gives me the shivers in a good way. Like, this was all totally inevitable, preordained about this entire story, and that sort of stuff I really do like. The sort of stuff you'd miss the first time around. So, is Midsommar worth seeing? Well, I'd say absolutely, but just bear in mind that some people think it's crap. Like, I posted I was watching it last night, and a friend on Facebook said, and I quote, "Bloody awful!" While another person said, "Amazing!" Great impressions. And the responses to Hereditary were also similarly mixed, which is why in my review of that film, I talked about that we all have a horror language. In other words, how do you prefer your horror served to fit your sorts of taste? And Ari Aster absolutely serves a very particularly distinctive recipe for this genre. And that recipe works fine for me. I've got a kind of wide diet, I suppose. I get a kick out of deep themes and symbolism just as much as like just straight out generic horror movies. And if you're looking for a film like Hostel, where American tourists wind up in the clutches of crazy European foreigners, that's just not what this is. Well, it is what it's about, but it's not really what it's about. And so therefore you might think it's slow and boring and tedious, ridiculous. I didn't find it quite as satisfying as Hereditary. I think I mentioned that before, but I wonder if that was just due to the sheer length. But it is a rich tapestry of ideas. I think it works very well, and I don't use that word tapestry by accident. Of course, tapestries are the key, one of the key symbols of the film, and the film is like a tapestry. And the message of what I'm left with is a message I keep thinking about. That, like human beings, I'm leaning in now, human beings need other people to empathize with them. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if you lived your whole life? Maybe you don't have to imagine, maybe you've experienced this. You go through extreme trauma or tragedy or whatever, and you just have this relentless sense that people around me don't appreciate what I'm going through. They don't get it. And I don't know how to express myself to those people. Perhaps we'd be desperate for empathy from anybody, no matter who they were or what they believed. Well, that's it. Thanks for listening to my little chat about Midsommar. Do check out my very brief review of Hereditary if you like. And also you can grab my new novel, Possessed. I'll make one appear there. In all good bookshops now. But until next time, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws, or visit my website, peterlaws.co.uk, or you can find me on Facebook at Peter Laws. There is a Facebook page called Peter Laws Author, but just hit me up on Peter Laws. It's the easiest. Thanks for listening, and stay empathetic. And don't forget, the flick's the church for God.